Привit. I'm Chuck Olinik. I'm a Ukrainian-American, baptized with the name Yaroslav. That's also the name I use in the Society for Creative Anachronism, a historical reenactment group. Well, in playing the part in the society, I developed an Eastern European persona, specifically one out of Kievan Rus. And I've been sharing a lot of information about that part of the world, but a lot of my videos have been rather Kiev-centric. So I started moving away from that because historically, as the Rus principalities were falling apart, then the Mongols are going to sweep in. That's really going to cause some harm. The center is basically going to shift away from Kiev. And in number 87 in my series, Tales of the Borderlands, I covered the Principality of Vladimir Suzdal, which was one of the strongholds. And in 91, I did the early days of Novgorod, or Novgorod, depending upon your pronunciation. Well, now here we are at the 99th video in the series, and we're going to get down to what I think is really the interesting stuff about Novgorod, and that's the Republic of Novgorod. It was a medieval state that existed from the 12th to the 15th centuries in northern Russia, and it stretched from the Gulf of Finland in the west to the northern Ural Mountains in the east, and the capital was the city of Novgorod, duh. And this is the part where Novgorod is becoming less and less willing to be dependent upon Kiev. In the second decade of the 12th century, Volodymyr Monomach strengthened the central authority in Novgorodland. Chronicles report that the Novgorodians paid tribute to him in 1113. During this time, the administration of the principality seemed to have grown up. The Novgorod Tisiatsky and Posadniki appointed boyars from the cities, and they in turn collected revenues for administration in the territories Novgorod held. So in 1117 a mistake gets made. Without taking into account the opinion of the Novgorod community, Mstislav was recalled to the south by his father. Prince Vsevolod Mstislavich was seated on the throne of Novgorod, and some boyars objected to this decision of the prince, and they were called to Kiev to explain themselves and were thrown into prison. After Mstislav the Great died in 1132, there were tendencies towards political fragmentation that were growing, and the Prince of Novgorod ended up losing the support of the central government. In 1134, Prince Vsevolod Mstislavich was expelled from the city. Returning to Novgorod, he was forced to limit his authority over the Novgorodians. So here's the prince. His status is not inheritable in Novgorod. His power's been reduced a lot, but he's still an important figure in the life of Novgorod. And there were like a whole bunch of princes over time that were invited in or dismissed by the Novgorodians. At least some of them had to sign a type of contract called a riad, and that protected the rights of the Novgorodian boyars, and it laid out the prince's rights and responsibilities. So he's not the top dog. And first and foremost, he's the military leader, or a military leader. And he's also supposed to be a patron to the churches in the city, and he's holding court there, except that, okay, when he's not in town, there's a lieutenant of his called a namestnik. He'll preside. Except that the prince doesn't get to do court alone. The posadnik, another elected position, he's always got to be present. And no court decision could be made without the posadnik's approval. Also, without the posadnik's approval, the prince can neither give out lands nor issue laws. And the prince also could not own land in Novgorod. He couldn't collect taxes himself. He lived off of money that was given him given to him by the city. According to several of these eriads, the prince could not extradite or prosecute Novgorodian outside Novgorodian lands. The princes had two residences, one on the marketplace, that was called Yaroslav's court after Prince Yaroslav the Wise, and another, the Horodish, several miles south of the market side of the city. Where'd the princes come from? Well, there were rods showing that a dozen of them came from Tver, Moscow, Lithuania. Okay, where did expelled princes go? Often to Pskov, which had once belonged to Novgorod, and Pskov often received princes expelled by the Novgorodians. Like, okay, you can have a home here. I covered the Veche and the Posadnike and the Tisiatske in another video, number 43 in the series. So there's more detail there, but I do need to mention them again since this is part of Novgorod's story. In spite of having a prince, the city-state of Novgorod had developed procedures of governance that looked pretty democratic from the outside. The people had the power to elect city officials, and they even had the power to elect and fire the prince. The precise constitution of medieval Novgorod, or the Republic, is a bit uncertain, although traditional histories have created the image of a highly institutionalized network of veches, those were like public assemblies, and a government of posadnike. A posadnik's like a burgermeister or mayor. Tisiatski, those are 1,000 men, originally the head of the town militia, but later that was like a judicial and a commercial official, and other members of aristocratic families and the archbishops of Novgorod. The veche, and I talked about this in another video, they basically became the commons or the lower house of parliament. An upper senate-like council of lords, Sovet Hospod, was also created with title membership for all former city magistrates, the Posadnike and the Tisiatski. Some sources indicate that veche membership may have been full-time, and there were parliament deputies that were later called vechniks. This last part's kind of disputed by some scholars. The veche of Novgorod could be presumably summoned by anyone who rang the veche bell, although it is more likely that there was a more complex procedure to it. The whole population of the city, the boyars and merchants and common citizens, there was a description I saw of from the Posadnike to the Cherny Ljudi, literally the black folks or the lowest class, and gathered at Yaroslav's court or in front of the Cathedral of Holy Wisdom. And later on, that was kind of turned into like an archbishop's veche, since it was held in front of the cathedral. Separate assemblies could be held in the konsti. Those are like boroughs or ends of Novgorod, which were divided into the Podol, that was like the riverside quarter of the old city, the Kreml, that's the citadel, the Tenets, it's a keep, and the Konets. Those are 5 communes in all. Each one was run by an elected starotsa, or an elder. Slovensky, Plotnitsky, that's the carpenter zone. Zahorsky, that's the suburban area. Koncharsky, the potter zone. Nerevsky, and then there were a couple of foreign settlements. A little more detail on the Posadnike and the Tisiatski. Okay, the Posadnik is going to chair the veche, and he's going to co-chair courts together with the prince, and he's going to oversee tax collection, and he's going to manage affairs in the city, and most of the prince's major decisions have to be approved by this guy, and any member, any posadnik would probably be a member of the boyar class, right? The city's highest aristocracy. The Tisiatski, these are the 1,000 men. Originally, they were like head of the town militia, but that's going to kind of change. That's in a position that's going to go over to the prince. But later, this is a judicial or commercial official. Okay, the 1,000 men, they're going to be elected by the Veche, just like the Posadniki, or at least they're going to get approved by the Veche. And the country was divided into Tisyachats, or thousands, in the core lands of the country, and Volosts in the lands in the east and the north that were still being colonized and were paying tribute. The precise makeup of the Veche is a bit uncertain, although it appears to have been comprised of members of the urban population as well as of the free rural population. Whether it was a democratic institution or one that was controlled by the boyars, that's been hotly debated. So you get the idea of, hey, if history makes you feel good, you probably aren't reading history. Tradespeople and craftsmen also participated in the political affairs of Novgorod the Great. And here's more of that traditional scholarship. It's argued that the town was divided into the 5 konsti, or ends, the boroughs of the city that the people lived in. Each end was then organized by the streets in which they lived, and the ends and the streets often bore names indicating that certain trades were concentrated in certain parts of town. Okay, that's pretty reasonable. Like there was a carpenter's end and a potter's end. The merchants were organized into associations, of which the most famous of those were the wax traders, called Ivan's 100, and of the merchants engaged in overseas trade. But they might not have actually been like guilds the way they were in Western Europe. This might be part of that feel-good history. So let's take a look at the Archbishop. It's unclear if the Archbishop of Novgorod was the real head of state or a chief executive, but in any case, he remained an important town official. In addition to overseeing the church, he headed embassies, oversaw certain court cases that were secular in nature, and carried out other secular tasks. However, the archbishops appear to have worked with the boyars to reach a consensus and almost never acted alone. So that's kind of a hint on the limits of power. And the archbishop was not appointed, but elected by Novgorodians and approved by the Metropolitan Bishop of Russia. The archbishops were probably the richest single landowners in Novgorod, and they also made money off court fees for the use of weights and measures in the marketplace, and through other means. And there was a charter in the 1830s that mentioned 30 administrative posts in the Novgorod territory where revenues were collected regularly and sent as a tithe to the Novgorod bishop. So that's kind of an indicator of the authority. Just because there was an assembly, that doesn't mean that there were always good times. Somewhere between 1136 and 1447, there were like 80 major uprisings that took place and turned into armed rebellions. At least a lot of them did. And if you're going through, research on what was causing this, you have to be real careful, because if you're going through Soviet sources, Soviet historians, they're going to try to make this a, class struggle, and that this is about abolishing the office of prince, or that the peasants should be allowed to rule the city. And that probably was not the case. That was probably different factions of the boyars going at each other. Okay, making a buck in Novgorod. Well, iron was mined on the coast of the Gulf of Finland, Staraya Russa and other localities. They were known for salt works, flax and hop production. Those were pretty important. A lot of this stuff was exported. Then you see the beekeeper's costume or garb. That's to let you know, honey and beeswax, big commodities. All right. Now, the biggest commodity, though, that was fur. Okay, so ermine and sable and minks, all, all those little guys being hunted specifically for their fur to be traded. The Hanseatic League really was not happy with Novgorod merchants sailing around doing sea trade independently. But Novgorod, even though it didn't belong to the Hanseatic League, it was a major stopping point there. And silver, cloth, wine, and herring were imported from Western Europe to Novgorod. And there was so much trade going on. There was a vast array of goods that were being transported along these routes and exchanged with local Novgorod merchants and other traders, so that you have, like, the merchants of Gotland, they had retained the Gothic court trading house well into the 12th century. German merchantmen established trading houses. There were districts within Novgorod that basically catered to this foreign trade. It took a while for the people of Novgorod to start minting their own coins. That probably isn't even going to happen until like 1420. But foreign coins were being used and silver was being used as currency. Okay. Now, I'll cover dealings with the wars with foreign invaders, including the Livonian Order and the Swedes and the Mongols, in another one of the videos. Until then, do побачення.